want to sincerely thank IPHA for inviting me along to your annual conference and your dinner here in Dublin. I'm very pleased to be back here. I had the pleasure of being here with you last year as well. And I want to particularly thank your president, Mary Dickens. I want to thank her for her address, but I want to thank her for her leadership, because Oliver used the word stakeholder, and I think stakeholder is an appropriate word. We depend in this country on your industry and the success of your industry. We depend on it for jobs, for good jobs. We depend on it for investment. We depend on it for our R&D ecosystem. And we depend on it for medicines that will save and extend the lives of our people. And in Mary, you have a president who is both constructive and effective. It is possible to be both. I often tell my political opponents, you can be constructive and effective, as Mary is. And I think, again, we've seen in her speech this evening the ability to rightly highlight the concerns and views of your organisation, but in highlighting those concerns and views, put forward constructive solutions as to how we should set about together trying to address them. And I want to touch on some of them this evening, but I also want to begin by acknowledging the fact that there are many other stakeholders here in the room that we have with us: the President of the IMO, the President of the NAGP, the President of the Irish Pharmaceutical Union. We have representatives from the Private Hospitals Association, from the Irish Hospital Consultants Association, from the Medical Council, and I'm sure they're just the ones I've seen, and I'm sure from many more. So thank you very much for being here. I see we've Avril Power, the soon-to-be, if not already, the incoming Chief Executive of the Irish Cancer Society, and I look forward to you taking up that role as well. So it's great to have so many stakeholders here in the room this evening. I suppose I should particularly welcome representatives from your member companies Lundbeck and Novo Nordisk here tonight, although I really don't feel like it after last night. But I have had some reports from Irish fans of an interloper in their midst in the match last night, jumping up and down wildly every time Denmark scored. I had to tell them that's actually Thomas Clee. He's the managing director of Lundbeck for the UK and Ireland, and indeed a valued member of our pharma industry. So I hoped they weren't too unfriendly to you. I understand they only gave you the silent treatment. And yes, that was the only reason they were silent. Nothing to do with the scoreline. But congratulations to you, Thomas, and we might get over it in due course. We might, and I don't have time to get onto France and the rugby, but congratulations to them as well. The theme of your conference is indeed a very important one, and it's one that it's very hard for anybody objectively to disagree with. It's new medicines for patients as fast as in Europe, and who could possibly argue or disagree with that proposition? I know you've had a very interesting and constructive debate earlier, and many of my officials from the Department of Health and indeed from the HSE were here with you to hear directly your suggestions and your speakers. And I want to assure you this evening, and the purpose of me being here this evening is to inform you that we're very open to listening to your ideas for improving access to medicines for patients, and indeed in doing so to learn from other experiences and perhaps best practice in relation to other countries. And this objective was very much a shared one in the context of the very long and intensive process which led to the 2016 framework agreement between our health service and IPHA. The government certainly wants, as I stated publicly in July of that year when the agreement was finalised, we want to ensure that Irish patients continue to have access to new and innovative medicines, and that Ireland remains at the forefront in terms of access to medicines, but in an affordable manner and within the resources available to this country. And I want to acknowledge sincerely this evening IPHA's commitment to delivering innovation in medicine. I think it was very eloquently outlined by Mary, and I want to also acknowledge your willingness to work with government on successive agreements to address the issue of affordability. And by the way, affordability isn't just something that affects government or something that affects taxpayers or patients. It affects you as well. Because producing innovative medicines is extraordinarily important, but producing innovative medicines and having markets able to buy them is extraordinarily important to you. So thank you for your willingness constantly to engage on that important issue. But let's be honest with each other, because you should be honest with valued stakeholders and friends. It remains a challenge for all of us to translate that common desire into a reality here in this country. It is an issue that has given me much food for thought, both as Minister for Health, but even more particularly as an Irish citizen. It is a topic that I'm indeed passionate about, and it's one that affects us all. It affects our families. It touches each and every one of our communities. Of course, I want all of our citizens to to have access to the newest, to the most innovative medicines that are out there as quickly as possible, but not at any cost. And that dilemma can either be viewed as a funding problem or a pricing problem. And perhaps you view the problem differently depending on which side of the table you sit on in various discussions. But from my perspective, there is no ambiguity in relation to that. We have gone to the well year after year, and we've asked the Irish taxpayer to provide more and more resources to fund our drugs budget. And by the way, rightly so, because the citizens of this country want those drugs available for their patients. But that resource pool, as your President has acknowledged, is not infinite, and neither should it be. We have got to talk about how we can spend it better and how we can have a better process in terms of how we arrive at decisions in a time-efficient manner. I think that's something, I hope that's something that we can all agree on this evening. And we've got to have prices that reflect the cost-effectiveness of the new products and which are affordable in the Irish fiscal context also. To put it in perspective, the medicines bill in this country has increased from just under €500 million in 1998 to €2.5 billion today. So we're spending an awful lot more on medicines, and we will continue to spend more on medicines. But that level of growth, combined with the anticipated increased demand in the years to come, is simply not sustainable, not just for this country, but I would suggest for any country. But I accept that this is a challenge that you're interested in addressing. In many ways, you're putting a challenge up to me this evening in terms of your conference discussions about developing better processes to improve access. And as a result, I want to accept that challenge and put a challenge back to industry as well. So I've today asked my department to look at how improvements can be made and to engage with you, IPHA members, to capture the ideas of key stakeholders on how we improve access. This is not a process that should in any way interfere in the current processes in terms of how we make new drugs available. We can't afford to wait in that regard. But I do hope, and I ask, that we would take part in this engagement in 2018, that we'd identify the issues, that we'd take the learning from today and the learning from other countries, and that we would work together to address them as we do. I know I don't want Irish patients to feel they have to take to the streets outside the Dáil or lobby their politicians to access new treatments. That's not a good use of our patients' time, energy and resources. It's not an effective process. Engaging in a campaign where you decide which drug to fund based on who runs the most emotive campaign does not help our citizens as a whole, is not the way to run a health service. So we've got to look at how we can address that, because I think IPHA agrees in relation to that. I want to see us perform in line with our European peers. I genuinely do. And I would respectfully suggest both government and industry have a role to play in making sure we can arrive at that point. So let's accept that joint challenge this evening, and let's meet in 2018 and let's have that process to see how we can improve and tease out the challenges and indeed the palpable frustration that I hear from IPHA through your conference and that I hear from patients, and that in many regards I share on occasion also. But of course, let's not try to convince ourselves that this is an Irish-specific problem or this is just something that impacts our country, because I engage regularly with my counterparts across the European Union, at health ministers' meetings, at EU councils and at various collaborative forums specifically on the issue of accessing new medicines over the past year. And it is clear that there's a shared view, whether you're a big country or a small country, or a rich country or a not-so-rich country, that our health systems will not be able to continue indefinitely to afford new medicines as they're developed and licensed. And I think, by the way, based on the amount of time industry spends in engaging in those collaborative forums, it's a recognition that industry has as well. And it's worth noting that this does include health ministers in what we'd regard as the relatively wealthy countries of Northern and Western Europe. Ministers are strongly of the view across the EU that the drugs industry does need to fundamentally reassess both pricing models and profit expectations. Otherwise, we'll arrive at the bizarre and unpalatable position where health services will simply not be able to secure access to innovative medicines at an affordable price for their patients, no matter how much they wish to. And I don't say this with any pleasure or satisfaction this evening. And I appreciate that for a research-based and innovative industry such as yours, whose very lifeblood is the development of products with the potential to improve people's lives and sometimes to even cure previously incurable conditions. But we do have to be honest with each other in terms of arriving at a point where you can continue to produce medications that will change and transform people's lives and find a market able to buy them. and that health ministers in this country, myself or any of my successors in due course, and indeed health ministers in other EU countries and around the globe, will be able to ensure that they can make them available to their patients. I acknowledge that companies absolutely have obligations, and you'll recognise that I too have obligations as well, because yes, we are a country in recovery, thank God. We stand here in a better space than we would have only a few years ago, but the fiscal constraints within which we operate still mean much of the additional health funding provided need to go to dealing with demographic pressures and dealing with the keeping present services continuing. And Oliver very kindly outlined the very many areas I have responsibility for across the health service. And you only have to look at the competing demands we have in health, and you don't need to just believe me for it, but if you look at the ESRI report on projections of demand for healthcare in Ireland out to 2030, it makes interesting and indeed frightening reading in many regards. It thankfully shows our population is projected to grow by 14%. It thankfully shows that people are living longer and that the share of population aged 65 and over will increase from 1 in 8 to 1 in 5, and the numbers of people aged 85 and over in this country will double. A baby girl born tonight in our country has a great chance of living to be 100 years of age. And these are all superb statistics, but with them they all present new demands on our health service. They present a health service that clearly needs to grow in terms of capacity, grow in terms of size, and do things differently. And that is why we do need to have the conversation about how we can improve the processes from both of our perspectives as well. I think we can agree one of the best tools we have to evaluate new medicines is the health technology assessment. As a result, we now have a situation where almost every new medicine is being subjected to a HTA by our NCPE to support the HSE in their decisions. The idea here is to ensure that decisions are made on objective and scientific grounds. And I'd like to take this opportunity this evening to acknowledge the quality of the work of Professor Michael Barry and his team, who carry out with limited resources. As the pipeline of new medicines continues to expand, they're getting busier and busier and busier. And I know that it's fair to say Michael is widely respected for his commitment to the challenging remit within which the NCPE has to discharge its duties, even though the outputs may at times present challenges both for industry and indeed for decision makers within the health service. I've acknowledged your frustration at the extended timescales which sometimes arise in order for the HSE and its advisory and decision-making bodies to complete a thorough evaluation and to secure the very best available price. As I've said, I look forward to my department and myself engaging further with you and your member companies in this regard. However, while I fully agree that there should be no undue delay in the completion of the various steps in the process, I hope we all recognise that the HSE, as a public service organisation, also has to fulfil its statutory obligations as well. And in recognition of the workload and hearing the concerns of industry in relation to the increased pipeline of new medicines now and into the future, I want to inform you that to assist the NCPE in its work, I intend to increase the resources available to the NCPE and provide an additional €750,000 in 2018 to allow it carry out its duties with more resources and more supports as well. I want to just make the point that I know IPHA and your member companies will also be closely monitoring the effects of Brexit, an issue which your President referred to, and the need for a small open economy like Ireland to build alliances. Whilst there will be many challenges for this country in relation to Brexit, many challenges, I think it will ultimately further reinforce that bridge that this country is between the United States and the European Union, and indeed this country being that small, open economy, English-speaking country that wants to be and will remain at the heart of the European Union. But when it comes to our EU membership, I also believe that that offers this country an excellent opportunity for the sharing of perspectives, exchange of information, and in some cases the potential for international collaboration in relation to new medicines. I'm very conscious that the pharmaceutical industry is indeed a very global one, and that individual countries, particularly smaller ones, are at the risk of coming off second best in dealing with sophisticated and well-organised business. The industry's insistence on the attachment of strict confidentiality to commercial terms does create a situation where industry can be organised at a global level, and yet countries are isolated one by one. I do intend, at both ministerial and official level, to ensure that Ireland will continue to participate in a number of voluntary European forums, including the roundtable meetings between health ministers and the pharmaceutical industry, my signature of the Valletta Declaration with a number of other EU member states, and other exchanges at official level. And I expect early in 2018 to formalise Ireland's involvement in some international groupings in relation to the issue of new medicines as well. Whilst price and reimbursement will absolutely remain a national competency, of that there's no doubt, I believe that the collaborative agenda will continue to develop, and that with cooperation between member states on issues of common interest, we can jointly facilitate better access to new medications for our citizens. I also believe, by the way, that there's significant opportunities for industry to benefit in not having to duplicate processes across different member states, in sharing more information more widely at an earlier stage. This is something that can be mutually beneficial for member states and indeed for industry as well. I do still believe that the framework agreement signed between the state and your organisation last year is another very positive story. Against the backdrop of increasing demand under many expenditure headings, and in particular the high-tech scheme, it was essential that we ensure a sustainable funding position. I'm also happy to acknowledge and thank that IPHA has fulfilled its commitments under the agreement in each and every section. I also believe it is important to place on record, noting the theme of your conference, that whilst we have much work to do, that since this agreement was signed, some 36 new treatments have been approved. In my view, this is a significant number and a benefit to patients, and benefits to patients today that they're accruing across a wide range of care areas. And we will increase further the amount of funding that we will spend on new drugs in 2018 as well. I also want to mention the potential in relation to biosimilars, because we must of course ensure, industry wishes us to do this, government needs us to do this, that we are securing maximum value for the €2 billion that we're already spending on medicines. This has the potential to create some further headspace for the introduction of new medicines, and increasing the use of biosimilars in Ireland does offer one such opportunity. My department is currently developing a national biosimilars medicines policy. I welcome the submission that IPHA made to the consultation process for this policy. I thank them for it. IMS Health, a leading provider of global health information, estimated in a report last year that by 2020, biosimilars have the potential to enter markets for a number of key biologics that have current sales of more than €40 billion. They also estimated that the cumulative potential savings to health systems in the 5 major European Union markets and the US as a result of biosimilars could exceed €50 billion in aggregate over 5 years and reach as much as €100 billion. So there is now a real opportunity for Ireland, and indeed to make significant savings, and indeed for some of your companies to make progress in relation to this area. So my officials are currently analysing the consultation submissions that were received, as well as reviewing international best practice to develop a range of appropriate policy levers to increase the use of biosimilar medicines in Ireland. There's also a strategic programme of work underway in the form of the Medicines Management Programme and the National Drugs Management Programme to maximise return from the investment in medicines. A number of examples have been identified where prescribing practice has been developed in ways which sees the use of product for indications and at rates of usage which are at odds with best practice and indeed with the experience in other countries. Quite substantial expenditure savings are possible where standardised national clinical guidance is followed. And again, this programme of work led by Professor Barry provides better value for the taxpayer, but importantly from industry's perspective, provides potential to reinvest in new medicines to be reimbursed. I do want to say, because I've heard much criticism in recent weeks and months in relation to the issue of rare diseases and how we assess medication in relation to rare diseases and the quality in relation to that. I am pleased that a working group has now been set up to particularly look at the issue of rare diseases medicinal products. I think we recognise that this is an area that clearly bears further review, and I've personally been very struck by meeting with patients who are so adversely affected by rare diseases, usually in very small numbers, and the particular difficulties they face. They may not be the people that make the 6 o'clock news. They may not dominate public debate, but the way we assess and try and provide medication for small cohorts of patients with rare diseases is something we really need to look at. And we need to ask ourselves, is the current process the most appropriate way of providing those medications? And I look forward to that work concluding and reviewing the proposals. And the committee will also contribute to the development of clinical guidelines for relevant orphan medicinal products and support the implementation of the same. So we clearly have a lot of positives to report on, I believe, after the last year, but we significantly have an awful lot of work to do in both meeting the demands and the expectations that people rightly have in relation to their health service. I want to assure you this evening that the government is committed to addressing issues which have a real impact on people's lives and to maintaining a sustainable trajectory for Ireland as we grapple with what are the very many byproducts of a very healthy economy. We are determined, of course, not to repeat the mistakes of the past when it comes to management or mismanagement of our economy. Ireland is not going back to where it was, and that's why I'm particularly encouraged to hear IPHA wanting to talk and engage about how we make a better process, how we tease out the issues, how we make sure there are timely decisions, which works for industry, works for patients, and works for the taxpayer. We have made and continue to make significant strides in relation to our drugs budget, but there is much for all of us to do for industry, for Ireland, and indeed internationally to consider. Everyone in this room has a vital role to play in driving innovation and in ensuring that Ireland has access to innovative, new and affordable medicines. I accept my role in that regard and outline to you my eagerness to work with you in relation to that. We clearly have a very busy year ahead. We'll have our engagement, we'll have our rare medicines product, we'll have our additional resources for the NCPE, we will have international collaboration. And I'm looking forward to IPHA continuing to be that constructive voice, constantly seeking ways to do things better, that works for industry, that works for patients, and works for the sustainability of the state. So I wish you a very good evening. Thank you for having me.